Jason and Jada were excited as they walked through the busy airport with their boarding passes in hand. They were twins, 10 years old, full of energy, and always curious about new places. This was a special trip. They were flying to visit their grandmother, and their mother had booked them first-class seats as a surprise. Their mother, Olivia Sinclair, was a successful businesswoman. She had always taught them to be kind, respectful, and confident. Since she had to finish some urgent work, she told them she would take a later flight and meet them at their destination. Jason and Jada were thrilled. It was their first time flying alone in such luxury, and they felt grown up. As they reached the gate, the airline staff checked their tickets and smiled. "Enjoy your flight," one of them said. The twins grinned and made their way down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin looked amazing. The seats were big and soft, with plenty of space. Jason and Jada found their seats near the window, excited to see the clouds from above. They placed their small backpacks in front of them and settled in, chatting about what they would do at their grandmother's house. Just then, a flight attendant named Ms. Reynolds walked past them, but suddenly stopped. She was a tall woman with neatly tied hair and a serious expression. She glanced at the twins, then at their seats and frowned. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "Are you two supposed to be sitting here?" Jason and Jada looked up, confused. "Yes, Mom," Jada answered politely. "These are our seats." Ms. Reynolds crossed her arms. "Are you sure? First class is very expensive," she said, looking doubtful. Jason nodded quickly. "Our mom got us these seats." Instead of checking their tickets properly, Ms. Reynolds sighed and shook her head. "I don't think so. Where are your parents?" "They're not with us," Jada said. "Our mom is coming on a later flight." Ms. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. She seemed to think for a moment, then let out a small chuckle. "All right, kids, let's not play games. Let me see your tickets again." Jada handed over the boarding passes, and Ms. Reynolds examined them. A slight frown appeared on her face. The tickets were real. But instead of apologizing, she pursed her lips. "Well," she said slowly, "just make sure you behave. First-class passengers expect peace and quiet." Jason and Jada exchanged glances but didn't say anything. They could tell she didn't believe they belonged there. As Ms. Reynolds walked away, another passenger nearby gave the twins a small smile, as if to encourage them. Jason whispered, "Why did she act like that?" Jada sighed. "I don't know, but let's just enjoy the flight." Little did they know, this flight was about to take a turn they would never forget. Jason and Jada tried to ignore what had just happened and focused on the excitement of the trip. The plane had not taken off yet, but they were already enjoying the soft seats and the big windows. Jason looked outside, watching the airport workers load luggage onto the plane. Jada, on the other hand, explored the seat controls, amazed at how the chair could recline with just a button. As they were settling in, Ms. Reynolds walked by again, carrying a tray with drinks for the first-class passengers. She stopped near them and watched closely. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, but her tone didn't sound friendly. "Yes, please. Can I have orange juice?" Jason asked with a smile. "Me too," Jada added. Ms. Reynolds nodded and placed 2 glasses of orange juice on their tray table. "Be careful with it," she said before walking away. The twins thanked her and continued chatting. Jason took a sip of his juice, enjoying the cold, sweet taste. He had never been served drinks in such fancy glasses before, and it made him feel special. Just as he was about to place the glass back on the table, the plane shook slightly as passengers continued boarding. The small movement caused Jason's hand to slip, and before he knew it, the glass tipped over, spilling juice onto his tray table. "Oh no," Jason gasped, quickly grabbing a napkin. Jada reached over to help, but before they could clean it up, Ms. Reynolds appeared again. Her eyes widened when she saw the small mess. "What is going on here?" she asked sharply. I accidentally spilled my juice," Jason said, his voice nervous. Ms. Reynolds let out a deep sigh and shook her head. I told you to be careful, she said. This is exactly why children shouldn't be in first class. Her words made Jason's face turn red. He didn't mean to spill it. He wasn't being careless. It was just an accident. Jada frowned and spoke up. It's just juice. We can clean it up, she said, trying to stay calm. Ms. Reynolds didn't seem to care. She grabbed a few more napkins and wiped the table roughly, sighing the whole time, as if it was the biggest inconvenience. Next time, hold your drink properly, she muttered. Jason felt embarrassed. He wanted to say something, but he didn't want to make things worse. He looked around and saw that some passengers were watching. A kind-looking woman sitting nearby gave him a reassuring nod, as if to say, "It's okay." Jada squeezed Jason's hand under the table. "Don't worry about it," she whispered. "It was just an accident." Jason nodded, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that the flight attendant wasn't treating them like the other passengers. Jason tried to shake off the feeling of embarrassment, but it stayed with him. He wished Ms. Reynolds hadn't spoken to him like that in front of everyone. He didn't mean to spill the juice. It was just a mistake, and mistakes happen. Jada could tell her brother was feeling bad. She leaned closer and whispered, "Forget about her. Let's just have fun and enjoy the flight." Jason nodded and gave her a small smile. "Yeah, you're right." The plane was now preparing for takeoff. The captain's voice came over the speakers, welcoming everyone on board and announcing that they would be in the air soon. The twins fastened their seatbelts, excitement bubbling inside them again. The plane slowly moved onto the runway, and within minutes it picked up speed and lifted off the ground. Jason looked out of the window in amazement. The city below became smaller and smaller until they were flying high above the clouds. "Wow," Jada whispered. "It looks like a dream." Jason nodded. He had flown before, but it always felt magical to see the world from above. Once the plane was steady in the air, the flight attendants began moving around, checking on passengers. Ms. Reynolds passed by the twins again, giving them a quick glance before turning away without saying anything. Jason and Jada ignored her and decided to enjoy their flight. They took out their tablets and started watching a movie together. Everything seemed fine for a while. But then, something happened. Jason shifted slightly in his seat, and his elbow accidentally bumped the edge of the tray table, causing it to make a small noise. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to get Ms. Reynolds' attention. She turned around quickly and walked over to them with an annoyed look on her face. "What now?" she asked, crossing her arms. Jason blinked in surprise. Nothing. You two need to be quiet and stop causing trouble," she interrupted. "Passengers in first class expect peace." Jada frowned. "We're not making any noise." Ms. Reynolds sighed and shook her head. "This is exactly why children don't belong in first class. I've been a flight attendant for years, and I know how this goes. You play, you make a mess, and you disturb other passengers." Jason felt his heart sink. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said softly. Ms. Reynolds wasn't listening. "If you can't behave, I'll have to talk to the captain about moving you." Jason and Jada looked at each other, shocked. Move them. But they had done nothing wrong. Jada couldn't stay quiet anymore. "We're sitting in the seats we paid for," she said firmly. "You don't have the right to treat us like this." Ms. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, young lady." And then, before anyone could react, something happened that no one expected. Ms. Reynolds raised her hand, and in a flash, she tapped Jada on the cheek. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make Jada gasp in shock. The entire cabin went silent. Passengers nearby turned their heads, their eyes wide with disbelief. Jason's hands clenched into fists. "You can't do that," he shouted. Ms. Reynolds looked around, suddenly realizing that people had seen what she did. But instead of apologizing, she straightened up. "I was just making sure you show some respect," she said, her voice quieter but still firm. Tears welled up in Jada's eyes, not from pain, but from shock. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Jason was about to say something when a deep voice spoke from behind them. "What is going on here?" They turned, and there stood the captain. His face was serious, his eyes filled with concern. Ms. Reynolds opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had no idea that things were about to take a turn she would never forget. Jason and Jada turned quickly in their seats, their hearts pounding as they saw the captain standing just a few steps away. He was a tall man with a serious expression, dressed in his crisp uniform. His eyes moved between the twins and Ms. Reynolds, clearly sensing that something was wrong. "I asked a question," the captain said in a calm but firm voice. "What is going on here?" Ms. Reynolds straightened her posture and quickly spoke before anyone else could. "Oh, Captain, I was just handling a little situation. These children have been causing disturbances in first class." Jason and Jada's mouths dropped open in shock. That wasn't true at all. The captain raised an eyebrow. "A disturbance?" He looked at the twins. "What kind of disturbance?" Jada, still shaken, took a deep breath. "We weren't doing anything wrong. Jason spilled some juice earlier, but we cleaned it up. Then just now, he accidentally bumped the tray table, and she got mad at us." Jason added, "She said we don't belong here. And then she." He hesitated, glancing at Jada, unsure if he should say it out loud. But before he could, a passenger sitting nearby spoke up. "Captain, I saw everything." The twins and Ms. Reynolds turned toward the voice. It was the kind-looking woman who had smiled at Jason earlier. She looked directly at the captain and said, "These kids were not causing trouble. They were sitting quietly, watching their movie. This flight attendant was being unnecessarily harsh to them." Another passenger, an older man, nodded. She even raised her hand at the girl. The captain's face darkened. He turned back to Ms. Reynolds. "Is this true?" Ms. Reynolds suddenly looked nervous. "Captain, she started, but the words stuck in her throat. The captain took a deep breath, clearly displeased. "I will not tolerate any mistreatment of passengers, especially children," he said. Ms. Reynolds swallowed hard. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just—" "You will report to the crew station immediately," the captain interrupted. "I will decide how to handle this situation after I speak with these children properly." Ms. Reynolds opened her mouth as if to argue, but seeing the captain's serious expression, she pressed her lips together and turned away. Without another word, she walked down the aisle, disappearing toward the back of the plane. The moment she was gone, the captain knelt beside the twins. His voice softened. "Are you both all right?" Jason and Jada nodded, but Jada's eyes were still teary. "She treated us like we didn't belong here," she said quietly. The captain sighed. "I'm very sorry that happened. No one should ever make you feel that way." He placed a comforting hand on the armrest. "You have every right to be here, just like any other passenger." Jason and Jada felt a little better hearing that, but the situation still felt unreal. Never in their lives had an adult treated them this way. Just then, the same kind woman who had spoken up earlier leaned forward. "Do you have a parent on this flight?" she asked gently. Jason shook his head. "Our mom is coming on a later flight." The woman gave a knowing smile. "She must be very proud of you two for handling this so bravely." The twins exchanged glances. Their mom had always told them to stand up for themselves, but right now, they just wished she was here. Little did they know, their mother was already on her way. And when she arrived, everything was about to change. Back on the ground, Olivia Sinclair was making her way through the airport. She had just finished her meeting earlier than expected and decided to take an earlier flight to surprise her children. She couldn't wait to see their excited faces when she showed up at their destination ahead of schedule. As she walked toward the gate, she noticed a few employees whispering among themselves. Some of them looked worried. Olivia was used to being recognized. After all, she was the owner of the airline, but something about the way they were talking made her pause. She approached one of the supervisors, a middle-aged man with glasses, and smiled. "Is everything all right?" The man looked startled for a moment, then quickly nodded. "Oh, Mrs. Sinclair, I didn't realize you were flying today. I decided to take an earlier flight," Olivia said. "But is something wrong?" The supervisor hesitated, then said, "There was an issue on one of our flights. A flight attendant mistreated two young passengers in first class." Olivia's expression changed immediately. "Mistreated how?" she asked sharply. The supervisor cleared his throat. "She accused them of causing trouble, spoke to them harshly, and even—" He hesitated before finishing. "Put her hands on one of them." Olivia's stomach dropped. "What flight?" she asked, her voice tense. "Flight 729, heading to—" "That's my children's flight." The supervisor's face went pale. "Your children?" Without wasting another second, Olivia turned and marched toward the boarding counter. "Get me on that plane," she ordered. Meanwhile, in the air, Jason and Jada were still trying to process everything that had happened. After the captain left, other flight attendants had come by, treating them much better than before. One even brought them extra snacks, trying to cheer them up. But Jason and Jada didn't feel like eating. They just wanted their mom. "Do you think we should tell her?" Jason asked quietly. Jada nodded without hesitation. "Of course. She needs to know." Jason sighed. "She's going to be so mad." Jada crossed her arms. "Good. Ms. Reynolds deserves to get in trouble." Just then, an announcement came over the speaker. "Attention, passengers. We have a last-minute arrival. Mrs. Olivia Sinclair has just boarded the aircraft." Jason and Jada's heads snapped up. "Mom," Jason whispered. The other passengers murmured in surprise. Olivia wasn't just any passenger. She was the owner of the entire airline. Before the twins could say another word, they saw her. Olivia walked down the aisle, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the cabin until they landed on her children. The moment Jason and Jada saw her, all their emotions came rushing back. They jumped out of their seats and ran toward her. "Mom," they cried. Olivia immediately opened her arms and hugged them tightly. "I'm here, my loves," she whispered. "Tell me everything." Jason and Jada pulled back, their eyes filled with tears. "It was the flight attendant," Jada said. She treated us badly, and then—" She hesitated before finishing. "She touched my face." Olivia's body stiffened. She gently cupped Jada's cheek, checking for any marks. Then she looked at Jason, her face unreadable. "Who?" she asked, her voice calm but full of power. Jason pointed toward the back of the plane. "Ms. Reynolds." Olivia took a deep breath, straightened up, and turned toward the flight attendant standing nearby. "Bring her to me," she said. A heavy silence filled the cabin. The moment Olivia gave her command, the flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to be the one to call Ms. Reynolds, but they knew they had no choice. One of them quickly walked toward the back of the plane. Passengers whispered among themselves, sensing that something big was about to happen. Jason and Jada stood beside their mother, feeling safer than they had all flight. They knew that once Olivia was involved, things would not go unnoticed. Within moments, Ms. Reynolds appeared. She had a forced smile on her face, but the moment she saw Olivia standing there, her confidence wavered. "Mrs. Sinclair," she greeted, her voice not as firm as before. "What a surprise to see you on this flight." Olivia didn't return the greeting. Instead, she looked at her children and asked, "Is this her?" Jada and Jason nodded without hesitation. Olivia's gaze sharpened as she turned back to Ms. Reynolds. "I hear there's been a problem," she said, her tone calm but dangerous. Ms. Reynolds swallowed. "It was just a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "The children where?" Olivia raised a hand, silencing her. "Careful with your words," she warned, "before you say something that will make this worse for you." Ms. Reynolds hesitated. I only wanted to keep first class peaceful. She tried again. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. And did my children disturb first class? The cabin was silent. Ms. Reynolds opened her mouth but couldn't find the words to respond. Then the kind woman who had stood up for Jason and Jada earlier spoke again. No, Mrs. Sinclair, your children were respectful and well-behaved. Ms. Reynolds was the one who acted unprofessionally. Another passenger nodded. She spoke to them rudely the entire flight, and when the little girl tried to defend herself, she put her hand on her. Olivia's eyes darkened. She turned back to Ms. Reynolds, who now looked pale. You put your hands on my daughter? Olivia asked. Her voice was soft, but the power behind it made Ms. Reynolds flinch. It wasn't. Ms. Reynolds stammered. I own this airline, Olivia continued. I built this company with the promise that every passenger, no matter their background, would be treated with the same respect. And yet here I am, hearing that my own children were treated as if they didn't belong. Ms. Reynolds' hands shook slightly. I didn't know they were your children, she admitted. Olivia tilted her head. So you're saying if they weren't my children, your behavior would have been acceptable? Ms. Reynolds opened and closed her mouth, realizing she had just made things worse for herself. The passengers watched, some nodding in agreement with Olivia's words. The flight attendant stood still, knowing this was a serious moment. Olivia took a deep breath, calming herself. Then she turned to the captain, who had been standing quietly, observing everything. Captain, I trust you will handle this matter immediately. The captain nodded. Absolutely, Mrs. Sinclair. He turned to Ms. Reynolds. You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. When we land, you will report directly to management for further action. Ms. Reynolds gasped. But that's final, the captain said firmly. Ms. Reynolds' shoulders slumped. She realized there was no way out of this. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the back of the plane, disappearing from sight. Olivia exhaled slowly, then turned back to her children. She placed a hand on Jada's shoulder and another on Jason's. I am so proud of you both, she said gently. You handled this with strength and patience. Jason and Jada smiled, relief washing over them. The flight attendants moved to make sure they were comfortable, and the kind woman beside them patted Jada's hand in support. The plane continued its journey, but everyone knew that this flight would be one Ms. Reynolds would never forget. After Ms. Reynolds walked away, the air in the cabin felt lighter. Passengers who had been watching the situation unfold now relaxed. Some even smiled at Olivia, impressed by the way she had handled everything. Jason and Jada finally felt safe. They no longer had to sit in fear of being treated unfairly. Their mother was here, and that meant everything was going to be all right. Olivia sat down between her children, still keeping them close. Are you sure you're both okay? She asked gently. Jada nodded. I was scared for a moment, but I feel better now. Jason let out a deep breath. Yeah, I'm just glad you came, Mom. Olivia smiled warmly and kissed both of their foreheads. No one, and I mean no one, has the right to make you feel small, she said firmly. You are both strong, smart, and you deserve respect, just like everyone else. Jason and Jada smiled, feeling proud of themselves. A flight attendant, different from Ms. Reynolds, approached them with an apologetic expression. Mrs. Sinclair, I just want to personally say that we are deeply sorry for what happened, she said sincerely. The entire crew is embarrassed by Ms. Reynolds' actions. That is not how we treat passengers, and it definitely isn't how we treat children. Olivia gave a small nod. I appreciate that, but this isn't just about my children. It's about making sure no one else goes through this. The flight attendant nodded quickly. I completely understand. Steps will be taken to ensure this never happens again. A few passengers who had seen everything spoke up. You did the right thing, Mrs. Sinclair. Your kids handled the situation so well. They were braver than most adults would have been. Jada blushed at the compliments, and Jason grinned. It felt good to be supported by the people around them. A few moments later, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience, and we appreciate you flying with us." Jason and Jada felt a wave of relief. Soon, they would be off the plane, and this whole situation would be behind them. As the plane descended, Olivia held both of their hands. "I hope you both know how proud I am of you," she said. "You didn't let someone's bad behavior bring you down. That's real strength." Jada squeezed her mother's hand. "You taught us that," she said with a smile. Jason nodded. "Yeah, you always say to stand up for what's right." Olivia's heart swelled with pride. "And you did exactly that." The plane landed smoothly, and as soon as the seatbelt sign went off, passengers began gathering their things. Jason and Jada stood up, feeling lighter now that everything was over. But as they prepared to leave, something unexpected happened. A young flight attendant walked up to Olivia and whispered, "Mrs. Sinclair, management has already been informed about what happened. They're waiting for you at the gate." Olivia nodded. "Good. This isn't over yet." Jason and Jada exchanged glances. They thought the situation was done, but they were about to realize this was just the beginning of Ms. Reynolds' real consequences. As the plane came to a complete stop, passengers began gathering their belongings. Jason and Jada held onto their mother's hands as they made their way toward the exit. Olivia walked with confidence, her expression calm but firm. She knew there was still something that needed to be done. The moment they stepped off the plane, they were greeted by a group of airline officials. A well-dressed man in a navy blue suit stepped forward. He had a serious expression, but when he saw Olivia, he gave a respectful nod. "Mrs. Sinclair, we were informed of the situation," he said. "We deeply regret what happened on this flight. This is not the kind of service we stand for." Olivia nodded. "I trust that actions will be taken." The man cleared his throat. "Yes, Mom. Ms. Reynolds has already been removed from duty, and a formal review will take place immediately. We do not tolerate this kind of behavior from our employees." Jason and Jada watched as Ms. Reynolds was led out of the gate area by another airline supervisor. She looked nervous and unsure, as if she couldn't believe things had gone this far. For the first time, she turned toward Olivia and the twins. Her expression was different now, no longer strict and harsh, but regretful. I'm sorry," she said quietly. Jada and Jason looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. Olivia, however, met Ms. Reynolds' gaze directly. "I hope you learn from this," she said. "No one should be treated unfairly, no matter who they are." Ms. Reynolds lowered her head, knowing she had made a mistake she couldn't take back. With that, Olivia turned back to her children and smiled. "Come on, let's go home." As they walked through the airport, Jason and Jada felt lighter. The experience had been difficult, but they had stood up for themselves. And most importantly, their mother had been there to support them. Just before they reached the exit, the kind woman from the plane caught up with them. "Mrs. Sinclair," she called. Olivia turned with a smile. "Yes." The woman looked at Jason and Jada. "Your children are wonderful. They showed real strength today. You must be so proud." Olivia nodded and put an arm around each of them. "I am," she said warmly. Jason grinned. "Thank you for standing up for us." The woman smiled back. "Anytime. The world needs more kindness." As Olivia and her children stepped outside into the fresh air, Jada sighed happily. "Mom, can we do something fun today?" Olivia laughed. "Of course. What do you both have in mind?" Jason thought for a moment. "Ice cream." Jada nodded eagerly. "And maybe a movie." Olivia smiled. "Done." As they walked toward their car, the sun shining brightly above them, they knew that this was a day they would never forget. But more importantly, they knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they had the strength to face them, together.